This story follows a man who gets transported into a game he was playing and reincarnated into a god named Nebula. And he has to battle 27 other gods to become the sole ruler of the planet and reshape it according to their vision. In the previous chapter, after finding out what the Frogman was planning, RECAPS and his men went on a rampage. Surprisingly, the Frogmen had a few tricks up their sleeves, as they have a monster with them that they revered as a god. But unfortunately for the Frogmen, the lizards had a true god backing them up, and so Nebula created his own creature and made it kill the false god that the Frogmen were worshipping. With this, the Frogmen had no choice but to run away to the other side of their village. But RECAPS ain't done with them yet, and with the rage of the other lizardmen, they immediately went to chase them. Now on to the next part. The warriors submerged into the water first, and 50 more Avengers followed. 80 lizardmen swam across the lake with their snouts above the water. After they made it to the island, the parent of the young ones bolted to their children to embrace them, and Owen was one of them. Finally, their dream came true, so they cherished this moment even more, and RECAPS was glad that everything went well for them. But just as RECAPS predicted, there were about 10 lizardmen who were exhausted from the trip, so they took the children on boats and returned to the lower village. Jarl directed the healthy lizardmen to examine the injured and make them rest. RECAPS put the lizardmen who couldn't swim well onto the remaining boats and had Yor direct them to go far around the upper village. After that, Yor asked if he plans to attack the frogmen from both sides, to which RECAPS confirmed, because he knows too well that the frogmen will be keeping an extra eye out on the lake. But now that they aren't short on numbers, they can divide into 2 groups. And this tactic had a purpose to trick their adversaries, as the 40 men he is taking can't fight well. But the frogmen will be disoriented if they show up in the dark, and once they're distracted, he will take their warriors and attack them by the lake. However, this is such a risky move even for RECAPS, so Yor couldn't help but be worried for him. So he asked RECAPS if he will be all right, and with confidence, RECAPS responded that he will be, even though there are fewer than 10 of them that can properly fight in his group. He had discovered another blessing God has given them while they were swimming to this island. This surprised Yor, so he immediately asked RECAPS what it was, out of pure excitement, to which RECAPS gladly explained to him that their scales are black, and they will glimmer under the moonlight the way water glimmers. With this, they will surely see the end sooner than later. And RECAPS' predictions were correct. All the fighting that happened at the upper village went as RECAPS had planned. The frogmen were in complete shock to see the lizardmen were already right in front of them, as they couldn't even see them coming. And they were completely in disarray as soon as they saw the numerous lizards rushing to them at both sides. With this, the frogmen panic, and therefore they were easily overpowered by the lizards. Aloy couldn't even grasp what was happening after coming out of his hut, but what is clear is that the tribe leader of the lizardmen is easily killing his well-trained warriors with ease. And without any other options, Aloy called out to his god and asked it to save him, as he had sacrificed so much just to serve him. But his god didn't answer, and RECAPS' spear just penetrated his skull, killing him in an instant. Meanwhile, Shunin bolted as soon as he witnessed his father Aloy getting stabbed several times with a spear to his death. He was indeed a coward through and through, and so he hid himself inside a hut, while his men died one by one. He heard their scream and plea for their leader to step in and guide them, but his coward ass couldn't even move his legs no more. So he stayed at one spot, hoping that this would just end. But as time passed, desperate, and with nothing else to do but stay put, his mind was filled with questions, and so he cried out to his dead god, but his dead god, who is now cut into many pieces, didn't answer. And so Shunin was left in the dark just waiting for something to happen, and he wasn't confident to go out, since the healthy frogmen had already run away from the village, and the only frogmen getting caught by the lizardmen were those afflicted with the itching disease, and thus had trouble breathing. Still, he was trying to hold on to hope, so he was thinking that even if his enemy has more warriors, they have way more people. There are some men that have the disease but can still fight, and there are also lots of men that are old but still have the energy to shoot arrows. If they could just buy some time to get themselves together, they would have a chance to fight back. But Shunin soon realized there wasn't really anyone to do that. His father Aloy was a brave warrior back in his heyday, but from some point, to be exact, from the day the two-headed fiend awoke from the lake, Aloy had become enchanted by the two-headed fiend's prowess. As long as sacrifices were offered, the two-headed fiend granted anything that Aloy wished to do, and through that, Aloy was able to eliminate his competitors, drive out hostile tribes, and defeat cockatrices. This seemed like a good deal at first. But once Aloy stopped doing things on his own, and instead had his god do everything for him, he became less and less like a warrior. Since everyone had learned the qualities of a warrior from Aloy, the frogmen who should have become courageous actually learned how to deceive others and act weak. They've all become cowards, and he became one as well. However, it was too late of a realization. Shunin wanted to run out and tell the frogmen to not be scared, and that they still had a chance. He could picture himself shooting arrows into the heads of the lizardmen and leading the frogmen to turn the tides, but it was all nothing but fantasy. Shunin hid in a hut as he saw the lizardmen warriors running nearby. The black-scaled lizardmen were faster and more agile than he was, so he wouldn't be able to run away. He listened quietly to the last of the screams that the frogmen were letting out before taking a look outside, making sure no one was there. But as he did this, a lizardman already took notice of the hut he was hiding at and was now behind him, which startled Shunin, so he whirled around and unconsciously reached toward his quiver to grab an arrow, but he had already wasted them all. He had successfully shot a few into some lizardmen, but none of the wounds he inflicted were fatal, and the poisonous frogs were useless. This was the consequence of relying on poison. It became a habit to aim at body parts that weren't vital, and then the shadow revealed its face. It was RECAPS, and he was there to end him. But as a warrior himself, he told Shunin to get up and draw his sword, as he will allow him to at least keep his honor. But just like before, Shunin was a coward, so instead of doing what RECAPS said, he just groveled in the ground and asked RECAPS to spare him. But he is not planning to do that. He wanted to erase every frogman from their village. But even before he could set things straight with Shunin, Shunin revealed a rather pitiful aspect of his character. He resorted to an obvious lie, claiming that they have built their friendship over the last few times they met, and he have no ill feelings towards them lizardmen. They were just threatened by the two-headed fiend. But his pathetic attempts hadn't convinced RECAPS, so Shunin racked his brain for words. With this, he decided to tell him a secret. And just as expected, he noticed a sudden change on RECAPS' face, showing that he was intrigued by it. And so he tells RECAPS that he will reveal to him the way to make a bow, especially about the material of the bowstring. But before he tells him, he needs to promise that he will let him live. But even before he could state his proposal, RECAPS told him to get straight to the point. Shunin then realized he wasn't in the position to bargain, and so he did what he was told, revealing to RECAPS that they're made out of the tendons in men's backs. And RECAPS was immediately convinced. He knew it would be the tendons of some kind of animal, but something always seemed off, because they could only make this if the tendons belonged to those who walked on 2 feet, as it would be the only suitable materials to make a bow long enough for the frogmen. This led RECAPS to ask Shunin from which species were the back tendons used to make their bows, and as soon as RECAPS asked this, Shunin realized the grave mistake that he had made. But there was no turning back now, and lying wasn't an option either, so with a frustrated expression, he answered that it was from the lizardmen. With that, RECAPS tilted his head, causing his face to be hidden in the shadows again. Only RECAPS' eyes were shining, and Shunin had no clue what RECAPS was thinking. But now Shunin was prepared for death. He knew he couldn't recover from that, and any reason that he could say would just be meaningless. So he just bowed his head and waited for his inevitable death to come. However, the words that came out of RECAPS' mouth were unexpected. Instead of killing him on the spot, RECAPS just permits him to go, even though he believes that it's questionable if there's really any grace or resentment between them. But he has already achieved a perfect victory, and Shunin also offered a deal, so he accepted it as a fair trade. And if that wasn't convincing enough, RECAPS stepped aside from the entrance of the hut. With this, Shunin hurriedly ran away, afraid that RECAPS might change his mind, so he didn't even realize there was a familiar lizardman next to RECAPS. And as Shunin was running frantically, Owen then asked RECAPS if he's really just letting him go, to which RECAPS confidently responded that he is, because he needs a moving target. RECAPS had been thinking he should slowly begin practicing with moving targets. He thought of the trick Owen had taught him before, and that is before releasing the bowstring. He has to hold his breath and look directly at the target. It was hard for RECAPS to understand at first, and he thought it was a fake trick. But when he was practicing his bow skills with Shunin, he used this technique and made a direct hit on the plank. Even Shunin was impressed, and if he practices more, Shunin thinks that he will be good as his warriors. This puzzled RECAPS, as he had hit the middle of the target, so he doesn't get why it wasn't enough. And so Shunin clarified that what he did is not all there is to a bow. He has both strength and accuracy, but he takes too long to fire an arrow. In response, RECAPS clarified that he only did this since he believes that he should inflict fatal wounds precisely rather than roughly hitting them. This remark of his only made Shunin laugh, as he thinks that RECAPS' reason was expected from a guy who hadn't used a bow in combat. So he pointed out to RECAPS that in actual combat, the target moves. Slowing down or stopping the target comes first. The final blow is what comes after. And this was a sound explanation, so RECAPS made sure to remember it. And seeing that RECAPS seems to trust him more, Shunin being the sly bastard that he was, he told RECAPS with enthusiasm in his voice that if they truly become friends, he will also teach him how to make a bow, because the ingredients could also be acquired by a lizard man quite easily. However, there was a hint of malice in his tone, Even the other frogman who was with him couldn't even contain their smile as Shunin had said this. But Rakrak haven't got a clue on what it was before. But now that he does, Rakrak's irritation and anger towards Shunin intensified more than ever. And so it only took a moment to let go of the bowstring, and using the trick that Owen taught him, the arrow released from the bow passed through both of Shunin's ankles, and Shunin fell to the ground in an unsightly manner. And the grayish-brown lizardmen who were waving their bloody wooden clubs around in search for a target to take revenge on, heard Shunin scream, and without hesitation, they rushed towards him, intent on carrying out acts of unimaginable cruelty, the kind that only arises from the darkest depths of the human mind. They were meticulous in ensuring he remained alive throughout, driven by the belief that a swift death would be too merciful for him. After that ordeal was over, a few days had passed, and Rakrak was still practicing his archery. By shooting the head of a frogman that was tied up and rotting, he had used it as a target for a long time, and as he was about to go for another strike, Owen, who was beside him, commented that the quality of the new bow seems to have improved considerably, as it was now able to fly as far as the bows the frogmen used, and they preferred to use a new bowstring, even though the previous one was a good bow that could be used for a long time. But after what they found out from Shunin, they couldn't use the old bows anymore, as it was still made from one of their fallen brothers and sisters, and they believe that they can always make another bow, until they find a better way to make bows than the frogmen did. They're going to use the back tendons of the frogmen to make bows in the meantime. But with the new string attached, Rakrak was dissatisfied, because if one pulls a little more, the bow will break, so it would be nice to have material to strengthen the bow. But the problem is, they couldn't find stronger materials in the area that they were in, so it seems like he can't just stay in this forest. But his reasons is not only to make a better bow, as he had learned from the Stargazer that this mountain area would become very cold once winter came. The lizardmen would become physically weaker, but they could endure the winter by making fires and wearing leather. However, the buffaloes that Rakrak's clan had were the problem, since water buffaloes of the wilderness would go to warmer places to avoid the winters, where there would still be grass. So few of them really have to leave to raise the water buffaloes, and the water buffaloes had already given birth once and were adjusting well. As time passed, the herd would get large and become a long-term food source for the lizardmen, just as Yor had initially envisioned. With that explained, Rakrak continued with his archery training. But Owen wasn't beside Rakrak to see him practice, but rather he was here to do his duty as a new warrior of their clan. And that is to report that they have finally exterminated the frogmen wandering around their area. This was a problem they had for a few weeks. Even though many frogmen had died, there were more frogmen who had run away, and Rakrak guessed there were about more than 1,000 of them, as there was a limit to how many frogmen the 30 warriors and grayish-brown lizardmen could kill in one night. And so, with the help of Owen and Jael's intelligence, Rakrak devised a plan to exterminate the frogmen who are just loitering around near their village. And Rakrak doesn't plan on capturing them and turn them into slaves, like how the frogmen did, even though it would be logical if they did that. And he believes that might even be their justifiable right since they fought and won. However, they have already seen the frogmen become weak once because of it, so they can't do that again. With this reasoning, Owen realized how incredible of a leader Rakrak truly is. It wasn't simply because the god Rakrak believed in was strong, because Rakrak was still going to fight the two-headed fiend even if his god wasn't there to help him. He would have fought even if there was no miracle, and he would have done so, even if he wasn't the tribal chief or a warrior. The courage he has to fight may be the reason why he is who he is today. And Rakrak not only tried to cautiously approach the frogmen, but he did the same with the grayish-brown lizardmen. To Rakrak it seemed that the grayish-brown lizardmen had also been ruled by another tribe, just like what happened to the blue-scaled lizard. But even though they had warmed up to the other lizardmen, they still were a bit wary toward Rakrak's tribe as a whole once their desires for revenge had calmed down, as they've experienced the horror of being controlled by a bigger group. And Rakrak wanted to protect the grayish-brown lizardmen, and were welcoming them into their fold. But this is different from what happened with the other blue-scaled lizard. As it was their first time seeing this tribe, they also have about 200 lizardmen, which is quite a lot. Not to mention their culture is very different, and in addition to that, they have an experience of being tricked by simple courtesy. So a method like that wouldn't work. With this, Rakrak was deeply troubled about how to go about it. But surprisingly, the answer came from the grayish-brown lizardmen themselves. When Owen was reporting what had happened while he was hunting the remaining frogmen, Jael was walking towards them but stopped as she had noticed a young lizardman hiding behind the trees, and so she approached the youngling to ask him why he is hiding. But this just gave the little one a mini heart attack, and before the little lizard could respond, Joel took notice of the item the little one had dropped. This sparked curiosity in her, so she took it to take a closer look. It seems like a well-crafted wood sculpture of their guardian, so she immediately went to Rakrak and showed it to him. and Rakrak was also surprised, as he thinks it's beautiful and nicely made, which made the little one happy, and so he willfully gave it to the tribal leader. And initially Rakrak was hesitant, so he asks the little one if he is sure. The kid didn't respond properly as he was just happy to see the tribe leader, but Owen told him it will be okay, because among the children in their village these days, making and exchanging things like this has become popular. To confirm what Owen was saying, Jael asked the kid if other children in his village have many of these as well, which the kid enthusiastically confirmed. And that is because the guardian who saved them is really a magnificent and great being. The kid's feeling is akin to a child adoring a superhero, but that superhero is real, and by the looks of it, this was the answer that Rakrak was searching for, a way for them to connect with the new tribe members, the grayish-brown lizardmen. And with the approval of his wife, Rakrak told Owen that he wished he had more of this stuff, which Owen gladly responded that he will help him look for more in the village. And with that, shine filled Rakrak's eyes once again, as he had overcome another problem. But before they could do that, Rakrak asked Owen to continue his report that was interrupted earlier, and so Owen did just that. As he was tracking down a group of frogmen, which he ordered to, they were led to cave that the frogmen were hiding in. It takes about half a day to get there from the lake. They killed all of them without much trouble. But the cave was a bit strange, and as expected, Rakrak showed interest in what Owen had said, so he asks him to explain further. And so Owen did just that. As they went into the cave, they noticed there was another entrance that seemed to have been carved out, but he is not sure how they carved the hard rock, and so Rakrak was hooked to check it out himself. Rakrak took Owen in jail and went down to the village. Rakrak thought it was something worth checking out, but Nebula already knew what it was. It's an ancient ruin, and he was contemplating if it is okay now to traverse an ancient ruin. But contrary to Nebula's worries, Rakrak already seemed interested. Rakrak had been exposed to too many things ever since he was young to turn down an adventure. Rakrak had lost both his parents when he was a child, so he had to grow up without anyone's help. And he had also fought a saber-toothed tiger to protect his tribe at the time when they had gotten kicked out into the wilderness. And all of the other things after that. Rakrak's life had been full of excitement. He didn't think of a new adventure as something dangerous, but rather as a trigger that could change the future. And thus, as the next day arrived, Rakrak and Jael started their journey and were accompanied by 6 additional warriors. Owen was also with them as their guide. Meanwhile, Nebula was a little worried, because he knows that the ancient ruins are a little different than his followers expected, and they might be disappointed of it. Unlike the fiends and abominations who appeared according to a player's divinity level, locations of ancient ruins were already set at the beginning of the game, which meant that the difficulties of the challenges were also predetermined. Therefore, at this stage of the game, it wouldn't be surprising for Rakrak to be stopped at the entrance to the ancient ruin without even the chance to give the challenge a go, due to not meeting the challenge requirements, commonly known as an invisible wall. But even in that case, it's still worth discovering an ancient ruin, even if it may be useless right now. Rakrak has lots of interest in writing, so his clan or their descendants may discover it later on. There were a few kinds of things that could be obtained just by successfully entering ancient ruins. First, there's ancient knowledge. Ancient knowledge was also known as ancient technology. It was called ancient, but in the game The Lost World, ancient things were comparable to things in the most modern and advanced civilizations. Entering these kinds of ancient ruins could yield advanced knowledge and technology that had degenerated over time. But usually it isn't even possible to get past the entrance if the level of civilization is too low. No matter what, the doors to an ancient ruin would never open accidentally, and in many cases required various archaeological knowledge on technology of the era right before the era of the ancient ruin. Nebula actually thought of these ancient ruins as technology farming dungeons made for the progression of the game, so there's no need for ancient knowledge to be given in ruins at this stage of time. So then the only possibility would be that the ruins will give rank knowledge or skills. Just like livestock farming and agriculture, being able to obtain knowledge and technology indicated that the level of civilization was still low. Knowledge and technology would eventually be developed over time, so it wasn't necessary to discover an ancient ruin, but acquiring various kinds of knowledge and technology never hurt. And at the moment, it seems like rank knowledge would be the best to have. That way, it would also be possible to adequately raise Rakrak's, Jael's, or Owen's XP. Obtaining something did feel good, but what was obtained could be difficult to use at times. Just like mystery, among the ancient ruins, there were cases where the ruins themselves had special powers. These special powers included automatically creating special resources, colonies of particular organisms being formed, converting certain resources to other resources, cursing or blessing the surrounding areas, or applying a status effect to a tribe or species that think they have ownership of the ruin. Mysteries themselves are good most of the time. The only problem is most mysteries are predetermined. It'll be hard for RECAPS clan to properly utilize a mystery as they're already thinking of livestock farming. Splitting the clan wasn't a problem, but their geographical location was. Mysteries weren't always good, and Nebula had already led RECAPS clan into the inner part of the peninsula, far away from the other players. Even if the mystery was on the good end, it would be hard to properly utilize it. When beginners obtain a mystery, they try to somehow change their builds to take advantage of it, but in reality, mysteries rarely play a significant role in winning the game. Nebula always believed in the statistics of the Lost World, and there was another thing that he wished he wouldn't get other than these mysteries, and that is a demonic ruin. Getting into the ruin wouldn't be too bad as long as it wasn't that kind of ruin, but upon reaching the entrance, RECAPS and Jaol noticed that the inscriptions were similar to those on the golden tablet they had previously acquired. Promptly, they decided to open the entrance, and despite the door's weight, RECAPS managed to move it. As the door opened, revealing what lay beyond, an entity on the other side was suddenly awakened. This being greeted them with a chilling welcome to a realm that Nebula had hoped didn't exist, a demonic world. In here stairs seemed to descend endlessly into the depths, while flashes of lightning sporadically illuminated the ominous space. The inside of the ancient ruin was a shockingly large empty space. It was roughly hundreds of meters in diameter, and there was green luminous moss here and there, which made it possible to see the overall size of the clearing. In the center of the empty space were arched stone bridges that were around tens of meters tall, and they were placed in a zigzag pattern that led downward. And seeing that there is no other way around, they will have to go on that path where the stones are laid, which led RECAPS to think that it would be nice if they could jump down at once, as it was such a time-consuming journey, since the stairs seemed to be endless after all. With this, RECAPS stood at the edge and think hard for an easier way to descend, but nothing comes into mind. So Jaol then inquired if he is going to pray to their god, to which RECAPS firmly responded that he wouldn't, as he didn't want to trouble their god with such matters. He believed that with their combined presence, they could more easily devise a solution. With this determination, they gathered to brainstorm a plan. They initially considered the idea of weaving long vines into ropes was the most reasonable solution, but considering the time it would take, they decided it would be better to go down the bridge instead. Still, they spent a few more minutes trying to think of something else, but as no great ideas came to them, RECAPS, who valued efficiency in decision-making, ended the meeting, and so they moved on to the next task, and that is to begin descending the bridges with their strong lizardman legs. However, difficulties emerged not long after they got onto the bridges. Several pairs of glowing eyes were fixed on them, as if these monsters were looking at them like a snack, which intrigued the crew on what danger it might be. And as the eyes drew closer, they revealed their source to be a group of rats, notably large ones at that. But Owen, who had lived in the area for a long time, wasn't a stranger to these creatures, and so he informed everyone on what it's supposed to be, describing it as a nutria, and they may have eaten it a few times before, and with this, they remembered exactly what it was, so now they don't have to wonder if it was a threat. But this one looks a lot bigger than the ones they ate, so there's still a mystery within these creatures. Because an average nutria was about 60 centimeters long and weighed around 10 kilograms, but the nutria RECAPS was looking at seemed to be about a meter long, which meant it would weigh tens of kilograms. Additionally, there was something else that piqued RECAPS' attention. Now he gets why he didn't think of nutrias when he first saw these creatures. And that is because nutrias don't travel in groups, or charge at people while baring their front teeth like that. So there is that possibility that these aren't the nutrias they knew of. With this, RECAPS decided to just call them rat monsters. It was a simple yet fitting name, because in RECAPS' opinion, normal animals wouldn't get hostile towards people for no reason. In fact, they would usually run away, but monsters on the other hand ran towards people as if they had a purpose. They might be the ones protecting this place, or maybe they're just rats. But regardless of their nature, the safety of his group was paramount. Therefore, he signaled to everyone to ready their weapons, preparing for any potential threat these creatures might pose. And without even a moment's breath, the rat monsters lunged toward RECAPS and the others, but it quickly came to an end. There was around 20 rat monsters, which was quite a lot, but RECAPS and his warriors were veterans. While the bridge was quite narrow for all 7 lizard men to stand on at once, the rat monsters charging at them ended up skewered by the warriors' spears. After that, RECAPS questioned whether the rats they found could be eaten, which Jaol believed there was no apparent reason why they couldn't be eaten. But she was curious about RECAPS' tendency to classify everything as either edible or inedible, and RECAPS quickly justified his approach, stating that determining what is edible is a matter of utmost importance. Jaol agreed that his perspective wasn't wrong, but she proposed an alternative viewpoint. She suggested they could also consider whether the rats could be domesticated and raised similarly to the water buffaloes. This immediately intrigued RECAPS, as expected of his wife. But their journey on this unknown area had just begun, so they will have to put that question for later. So they decided to just remove the organs first in order to easily carry the rats and move along. And while they quickly took the organs out, Owen curiously asked Rakrak and Jaol on what do they mean by raising these rats. And Rakrak was about to answer when he realized he didn't know what it meant himself, as the water buffaloes were raised for food, but that wasn't the case with the drake Manun. They weren't going to eat Manun. So he contemplated the concept of raising animals as akin to having slaves. But slaves were dissatisfied with their status, while things that were raised seemed somewhat satisfied. Slaves would also receive backlash for doing as they wished, so they had to suppress those feelings. But that didn't seem to apply to things that were raised. And with this, he was conflicted on what to say, and so he just answered Owen that he's not sure. But still his intelligent wife might have one. So Rakrak looked at Jowl expecting her to answer instead, but Jowl also seemed troubled by the question, and so Jael also gave up on giving a proper answer, and just explained to Owen that it hasn't been long since they've raised something, so they don't know much about it. They're currently raising water buffaloes in Manun. They gain meat from the buffaloes and strength from Manun, and in exchange, they find plants for the buffaloes and give Manun food. They wish for these relationships to last long. This is the only answer she can give him about what it means to raise something. And Owen thought that was a good enough answer, and so he decided to share to them what he had in mind, and that it might be possible to raise fishes. But Rakrak, being his primitive ass, just think it would be impossible, since he thinks fish just come and go. But this wasn't Rakrak's fault, because in the swamps and ponds Rakrak used to live around, the fish would gradually decrease as they got eaten and eventually disappeared. However, Owen, who used to live with the aquatic frogmen, knew that wasn't the case in bigger ponds, and so Owen could enlighten Rakrak that fish also lay eggs and give birth to young. This was proven by him to be true, as the frogmen would warn them against catching fish when it was breeding season. And with this, Rakrak was extra intrigued, so he immediately asked Owen how could they raise these said fish, and so Owen did just that, explaining to him that there are fish that grow big, which are easier to catch and eat, but they are also easily eaten by other fish when they are young. So it would be nice if they just stack rocks or wood to make a dike to prevent the younger fish from getting eaten, which Rakrak thought it would be difficult to do such a thing in a huge and deep lake. But he didn't say it out loud as he considered it a unique and good idea regardless of it being difficult in reality. And he is thinking of dividing the clan into two, so it'll be cruel to those who have to leave and also to those who have to stay through the winter. So it would be nice to find a way to do what Owen had just suggested. But then all of a sudden, one of the warriors handling a rat monster screamed, and Rakrak quickly turned around and approached the warrior and looked at the warrior closely. The warrior held his hand in pain. One of his fingers smelled slightly burnt, but it doesn't seem like he got bitten though. So Rakrak asked the warrior what happened, to which the warrior explained that all he did was touch the rat, and he felt pain. This instantly piqued Rakrak's interest, and so he went ahead and reached toward the rat monster. And as his finger came close to the rat, a bright spark suddenly climbs up to Rakrak's hand. But he wasn't a stranger to this kind of thing, as Rakrak knew the concept of static electricity from when he touched fur leather in winter. But this was too painful to be compared to that, and looking at him in pain, his wife Jowl immediately went to him with concern in her eyes, as this was also a shock to her, as she doesn't have a clue on what is going on. And only Nebula, who was watching everything unfold from behind, realized what it was. The Nutria was possessed by the demonic energy of the ruin that he hoped it would not be. And this was because divinity wasn't the only source of power in the Lost World. For example, the last time Nebula had won the game on Earth, he used nuclear weapons, which was technology rather than divinity. Divinity and science would grow directly proportional to each other until the Middle Ages, and in modern times, they became negatively correlated. When people become faithful to their gods, they tend to distort science. On the other hand, when people become proficient with scientific technology and knowledge, they believe in God less. This was because science could do what the gods could do. But this decrease in belief was still less than in the real-world Earth. There's no way to really know if gods exist on Earth. But gods are real in the Lost World. And in the Lost World, alongside divinity and science was magic. Magic was also negatively correlated with divinity, but it was different from science in that the negative correlation between magic and divinity existed from the very start. This is because magic is its own force. Anyone or anything that used powerful magic in ancient times was unstoppable. Those who had magic would be perceived as a god, and thus they wouldn't believe in a god. Magical powers naturally began to weaken and fall during modern times as science developed. But not every game progresses until modern times, and he had also secured quite a few wins with magic. Therefore, he knows too well that it was important for players of the Lost World to not only utilize divinity, but also balance science and magic well. Nebula had a good understanding of these rules, and always thought of using magic if necessary. But he didn't think he would obtain demonic magic this quickly. And among the many kinds of ancient ruins were the demonic ruins, which were considered an ultimate dungeon to obtain demonic magic. Simply put, acquiring demonic magic would grant the individual the ability to learn magic. Additionally, the effect not only applies to the individual making the achievement, but also to a few generations of their close kins, especially if it's a clan society like RECAPS clan. All members of the clan may obtain demonic magic. That was the dangerous part. Obtaining demonic magic did not mean one would become a wizard right away. In order to use magic, spells needed to be learned, and these types of spells required research on ancient ruins, all kinds of ancient knowledge, and magic. However, those who had demonic magic were powerful just by having it. They could make small flames, make objects shine, or even make sparks fly. And this ancient ruin will give electrical demonic magic, as it was described in the system window Nebula was looking at. Electricity is always useful. It's on the better side of demonic magic. But the problem was that if demonic magic was obtained, there would be penalties in obtaining faith points. RECAPS was likely to be the one to conquer the ancient ruin, so there was no question that RECAPS would receive the demonic magic. In addition to that, it was possible that the 350 lizardmen related to RECAPS within his clan would also receive the demonic magic, and 3 out of the 350 would get it for sure. And they'll just think it's some kind of mysterious power. It'll even seem fancy since it's electrical demonic magic. However, Nebula knew what would happen afterwards. Making use of the magical ruins was a common mistake among the beginners of the Lost World. Beginners would become obsessed with the fact that they could obtain magic and lead their tribes to demonic ruins just to make them obtain demonic magic. They would also then focus their resources on those who had the demonic magic and increase their XP. The cultivated individuals would pass on their demonic magic to their descendants, and the demonic magic would become stronger and stronger over the generations, until finally, a wizard emerged. A wizard is one of the best classes from the beginning to the middle stages of the game. Wizards had strong powers that no individual could handle. The stronger they became, the greater the number of enemies they could deal with at once, which would lead to them gaining the authority to create aristocracy. Above all, because the source of the wizard's powers were magic rather than a God-given gift, they would not rely on a god. And in the Lost World, demonic magic stemmed from an ancient evil called red herring. That's why divinity and demonic magic come into conflict. Once wizards became that powerful, even the players would not be able to do anything to control them. Therefore, the players would invest in witch hunting or taboo to decrease the influence of demonic magic as a result. Still, it is possible to control the power somehow, but in the process, too much time and resources would be wasted. Such power might be a perk in the beginning, but that all becomes meaningless if resources are wasted on unnecessary things by the middle of the game. And a player such as Nebula would be able to balance magic well, allowing him to apply it to his build with no other problems. But it was tiring to do so, and determining whether to increase or decrease unnecessary variables was also an important task in the game. According to the statistical side of things, demonic magic did have a lower win rate due to beginners getting overthrown by wizards, but it was still on the higher side of things when compared to pure divinity or deity-demon blend. But he does aim to play with more variability, so he was contemplating if he should warn RECAPS that the demonic ruin will start to show its true colors and try to tempt them. And with RECAPS' personality, he would go to the ends of the ancient ruin if he doesn't warn him. And so Nebula agonized whether to warn RECAPS, but then decided not to. This was because once he checked RECAPS' stats again, he discovered a unique ability that hadn't been there until recently. It was likely to have appeared as RECAPS defeated Shunin and Aloy's frogmen. With this, Nebula was convinced that it might be fine to just leave it to RECAPS, as he believes that RECAPS will get the best outcome, since there is a way to acquire both divinity and demonic magic without getting penalties after all. And so Nebula just waited and see what will happen. Meanwhile, back to RECAPS' side of things. Amid the sharp pain that RECAPS was experiencing, RECAPS suddenly heard a voice speak to him, asking him if he wants this kind of power, which made RECAPS look around, but saw nothing unordinary. So his attention went to Jaol, who was frantically asking if he was okay, to which RECAPS replied that he was, but seeing what happened to him, they should make sure to kill these rat monsters. So those who know how to shoot arrows, he asked them to ready their bows, and those who are injured should watch the rear. But as he was instructing them, RECAPS then heard the voice again, asking him again if he was interested in the power displayed. RECAPS only moved his eyes this time and saw a wide, transparent creature crackling with blue sparks hovering in the air. Its outer appearance was that of a stingray, but RECAPS, who had never seen a stingray before, didn't know what it was, and as he was wondering what to say to it, The electric stingray then told Rakrak that it can hear him even if he speaks with his mind. This fascinated Rakrak, so he did just that, promptly asking the stingray what it was, to which it confidently responded that he is the spirit that protects this ruin, and he is only visible to those with strong powers. But Rakrak thought that the stingray said was a lie. But as he thought of this, he realized this thought wasn't communicated to the spirit. Consequently, he realized that shallow thoughts are communicated, but deeper thoughts aren't. So if the stingray really is a spirit that can distinguish those with strong powers, he can try to read this thought too. But as he expected, the electric stingray wasn't able to read this thought. With this in mind, Rakrak was more confident in conversing with this unknown entity. So he then asked the stingray, what power is it talking about? Which the stingray proudly responded that he is talking about electricity. The power to burn other beings and create light. Sun-like light and fire-like heat, and it can give him that power. And Rakrak nodded in a subtle way that would not seem strange to the others that were with him, and responded that he will gladly accept it if it gives it to him. But the electric stingray hesitated, revealing that there was one more condition Rakrak had to meet before receiving the promised power. This revelation caused Rakrak to frown. As expected, this stingray was a scammer. It is not here to give but to trade. And so with a cold tone in his thoughts, Rakrak schooled the stingray that if it was really initiating a trade in the first place, it has to state the conditions first, and it needs to make sure to convey what it is giving him and what it is that it wants from him. But because of what it just did, Rakrak expressed that he was disappointed and felt a lack of trust and straightforwardness in their dealings. So he might not be willing to accept his offer anymore. Still, the stingray tried to convince Rakrak that meeting the condition would be easy for his strength. But Rakrak had enough of its bullshit, so he looked at the stingray with the most devious side-eye and commanded it to not lie no more. And he doubles down with a warning that if he felt even an ounce of lie on the words it was about to say, he would just go back right now and block the entrance to this cave that seemed to have been blocked for no apparent reason. Then he could order his warriors to prevent anyone from entering this cave and warn all the descendants of his tribe to never enter. So if there is really something it wants from him, it should know its place and show the appropriate attitude. And with this, the electric stingray was clearly in a state of panic. And this was such a turn of events, because in Nebula's knowledge, the intelligence of spirits wasn't that high. However, it wasn't easy for individuals who entered a demonic ruin to resist the temptation of the spirits. As expected, this was Rakrak's new ability in play, as he could now detect bullshit even from miles away, and this skill proved advantageous in negotiations, allowing him to gain the upper hand by identifying and leveraging any untruths or exaggerations presented by others. It quickly submits to Rakrak's demand. Now on to the next part. With Rakrak's threats loud and clear, the stingray bowed its head and apologized. In response, Rakrak told the stingray there was no need for apologies, just to remember this lesson for the future. With this, the electric stingray flew closer to Rakrak, but its fluttering seemed less powerful than before, and then told Rakrak the truth that it is actually sealed within this ruin. It can fly freely within this space, but is unable to leave. It wishes to be freed from this restraint, offering the power of electricity to whoever could liberate it. And Rakrak, understanding the situation, promptly inquired about what needed to be done for its release, to which the electric stingray explained that it was quite straightforward actually. If he goes down there and kill the one guarding its seal, it will become free, and so it can give him the power. This caught the interest of Rakrak, so he followed up asking if that means he would be able to do the zap thing that the rat monster did, to which the electric stingray enthusiastically confirmed. However, it clarified that he couldn't suddenly gain what the rats could do, as he still need to train the power by continuously using it. And then it becomes stronger. And the power it has is very strong, so it won't only go to him. Other than himself, a few others within his clan will get the power too, and its power can be passed down to his descendants. The progress and power he has made won't be directly passed down, but should his descendants continue to train their power like he does, some of those who share his blood may become stronger than him. This instantly amazed Rakrak. This prompted for Rakrak to willfully express his true thoughts and asked about the elephant in the room, asking the stingray the exact reason it is trapped here. But just like before, it hesitated and stuttered as it answered Rakrak's question, explaining to him that it was because its power is too strong. People stay away from dangerous things like poison or monsters, and if they can't stay away from it, they trap it and put it away. With this, Rakrak's face hardened, and pointed out that it just admitted that its whole being is dangerous. This only gave Rakrak more of a reason to keep it contained, but he knew this wasn't the case, as he felt that this stingray is just stupid, so it just made an error while it actually attempted to hide something again. Or the harm is greater than the benefits of having that power, and the stingray was about to defend his case and try to lie its way out of the situation. but it remembered what RECAPS had just said, and so it immediately stopped itself from saying anything rash, and seeing that the electric stingray be mindful and respected his wishes, RECAPS decided to release the tension within them by admitting to the stingray that he still wants to have that power. So they should just start the deal from the top and called the stingray Zap. But this only confused it, so RECAPS clarified to it that he decided that will be its name from now on. To which the stingray tried to correct RECAPS that it is not named Zap though. In response, RECAPS explained that this was the start of his deal, with him choosing its name, as it tried to trick him. So the conditions have to be more favorable to him. Zap became sullen, and just responded with a soft okay, and it then inquired about his other conditions, which RECAPS answered as though it was self-evident, requesting Zap to clarify why it is considered dangerous, as RECAPS held the belief that if Zap truly possessed power worthy of a deal, there would be no need to conceal its dangerous aspects. Conversely, if there were reasons to hide its perilous nature, then it wouldn't be worth entering into a deal for. Zap hovered in the air, think for a little bit, and understood RECAPS' reasoning. So it then confirmed to RECAPS that its own power is worth taking a risk for. This is what RECAPS had wanted, so he asks what kind of risk it was talking about, prompting Zap to explain further, stating that it originated from an ancient evil, the ones who ruled over this world a long, long time ago. But it was so long ago that their existence was forgotten, and even the gods don't remember them either. Because of it, itself also can't recall its origin. One day it just found itself trapped here. And RECAPS understood Zap's feelings quite well, as he also grew up as an orphan. So he tells Zap that there's no need to know who it were born to be. What's more important is deciding what it'll do about the days ahead of it. Zap was a bit thrown off that it got comforted by RECAPS' words, but soon continued. Zap explains that a power of unknown origin is intoxicating to people, because the source is unknown. This allows one to believe that the power belongs to them, when in reality, they just happen to get it by chance. Once they start using such a power, they start to believe they deserve it. And once they start to think that way, they look down on the ones without power. RECAPS found it a bit difficult to understand, but nodded, remembering Boer's and Shunan's situations. And so it seems like the demonic magic also makes people become like that, which Zap confirmed, as its power spreads indiscriminately. Consequently, RECAPS tried to predict what would happen if he obtained this power. As this electrical demonic power seems different from something a god would give, God's power is only given to those God chose and at God's discretion. On the other hand, if someone is given a power like this without being deserving of it, others would become jealous and envious, and if that power grows greater and greater, there would be people who scorn God. And RECAPS then understood the reason why Zap was dangerous. This led him to ask Zap why should he take such a risk to have its power, which it immediately responded that it's because its power is strong. Still, it's also destructive. And as RECAPS was heavily thinking of what to do, Zap then demonstrated his power. With this, RECAPS immediately thought he had seen this kind of light from somewhere, and eventually realized what it was. It was like thunder and lightning. RECAPS assumed that the strength of the power determined the intensity of the light it produced. It could be just a small spark at first, but once the power grew and became stronger, it could become thunder and lightning. RECAPS also understood that it would be advantageous in battle if he could produce electricity from his body like the monster rats did. And so RECAPS admitted to Zap that it's indeed an appealing power, which made Zap delighted, promptly asking RECAPS if he made up his mind and set it free, to which RECAPS confirmed, but before that he has a condition that the stingray should fulfill. This intrigued Zap, so it flew towards RECAPS as if it expected RECAPS to say so and continued to talk, as it assumed that RECAPS wants to have the power for himself, which it won't judge as it was understandable for an individual to monopolize such power, but the process will probably be difficult. But it's possible. There are a few things he will need though. In order for one person to have its power, a ritual of the same level as the magic will need to be prepared. However, before Zap could continue further, RECAPS shook his head to convey that what it assumed was incorrect. He doesn't have any intention of keeping the power only to himself. Zap was taken aback and somewhat puzzled by RECAPS' line of reasoning, leading it to request further clarification. RECAPS highlighted that Zap had initially mentioned the power of electric demonic magic was distributed indiscriminately, but also noted the possibility of concentrating this power in one individual through a ritual. RECAPS reasoned that if both statements were true, it might also be feasible to selectively distribute this power to specific chosen individuals, rather than indiscriminately. Zap, still appearing puzzled, conceded that it hadn't experimented with this approach but believed it could be possible. A minor ritual might suffice. Although Zap was uncertain why RECAPS would want to do this, Zap reasoned that unless RECAPS monopolized all the power for himself, the outcome would essentially be akin to leaving it to chance. RECAPS, however, disagreed, asserting that the situation would indeed be different. If the power were bestowed only upon certain individuals, it would appear as though it was a deliberate choice made by a god. In other words, the power would no longer seem like an ambiguous force from an ancient evil with no identifiable origin, but would instead be recognized as a power with a clear source and purpose. But Zap just then pointed out that it's not God's choice, though. This power isn't granted by a god. But RECAPS just slightly smiled and told Zap that's not the important part. If people think it's God's gift, then it will be from that point on. What difference does that make? The chosen ones will think that God has given them the powers, and their faith and devotion will reach God. And Zap tried to argue against RECAPS, but couldn't think of anything to say. Because what RECAPS was saying was also true of the system of the lost world. If those who had demonic magic believed it was given to them by chance, there would be penalties in gaining faith points. On the contrary, however, if those who had demonic magic mistook it as a power given to them by a god, it would actually result in more faith points. And seeing that Zap was on the same page as him, RECAPS went ahead and told his second condition, surprising Zap as there were more. And so Zap immediately pointed to RECAPS that if he includes himself naming it however he wishes, this next one would actually be the third condition. But RECAPS didn't care about the numbering, as he just casually continued to his third condition. And seeing how determined RECAPS was, Zap just let him do what he pleases. In response, RECAPS cast his gaze towards Zap and told it that it needs to believe in God as well. This shocked Zap beyond belief, but before it could respond, RECAPS clarified that not just any god. It should trust and believe in their nameless beetle god. But as expected, Zap flashed in refusal. The other conditions are fine, but that will be hard for Zap, since it is a spirit of demonic magic. It was created from an existence that has been around longer than gods. RECAPS lightly hit his tail on the ground. The group who was with RECAPS noticed his discomfort and checked up on him. Joel asked if there was something wrong and if the pain in his hand was okay, and RECAPS simply said he was fine. RECAPS then focused on Zap and asserted that its origins, the hows and whys of its birth, were irrelevant. What mattered was its intentions and actions moving forward. RECAPS then questioned Zap on why it desired freedom. Zap replied with a straightforward reason. It was inherent to its nature. As a spirit of demonic magic, its primary goal was to disseminate demonic magic as widely as possible among various beings. This was the fundamental purpose of its existence. In response, RECAPS admits that Zap seemed useful enough to him, and their nameless beetle god happens to be generous towards useful beings, so it was possible that their god may listen to and fulfill Zap's desires. And the reason why it was made is not important, as they believe that the reason for one's own existence is determined by themselves, not by the one who created them. Zap then steadily slowed its fluttering, and told RECAPS that what he wants is impossible since gods do not like spirits of demonic magic. But RECAPS, who has an unwavering conviction, countered that Zap shouldn't judge their god through the lens it looks at the world with. And seeing the stern look on RECAPS' face, Zap inquired whether RECAPS' god would truly accept a being like itself, which RECAPS confirmed, provided that it accepts all the conditions he offered. And he reassured Zap not to worry. He may not know all of God's wishes, but he is the one who understands his wishes best among everyone who knows of him. And with this hidden ability of RECAPS, exuding infinite charisma through his eyes and voice ultimately swayed Zap's decision. Consequently, Zap chose to confess that it had actually lied to him about a few things. Zap revealed that it is not just simply trapped in this ancient ruin. It is true that a challenger of the ruin must defeat the ruin's guard, but that guard is under its rule. It controls everything in this ruin. Furthermore, Zap admitted to sending the demonic magic enchanted nutrias to them lizard men, which RECAPS feigned surprise at this revelation. But in truth he was not taken aback, and he also understood the reason why Zap told him that he needed to defeat the guard, and that is because the power shouldn't be given to those who are weak, since they wouldn't be able to widely spread Zap's powers. And Zap confirmed this reasoning, and recently, the Frogmen tribe had also come to attempt the challenge. However, they didn't deserve it, which RECAPS thought that was obvious. Meanwhile, Zap was surprised that RECAPS was taking it well rather than before, and therefore, Zap quickly pointed out to RECAPS that it had deceived him and questioned why he wasn't more upset by this revelation. And RECAPS simply shook his head in response, as he had already anticipated the deception, and he was not the type of lizard man to become upset just because he was deceived without even losing anything. And he can always forgive when he wishes to, even though forgiveness isn't a virtue of a warrior, but he is also the tribal chief. And forgiveness and reconciliation are indeed virtues of a tribal chief. This surprised Zap, and now it found itself viewing RECAPS in a new light. But even before Zap could react further, RECAPS expressed that he understands where Zap is coming from, not as a warrior, tribal chief, or high priest, but as a lizard man and as an individual. Getting twisted isn't strange after living in a wet, dark place like this, always looking at monster rats. so it seems like it could use some fresh air outside and look at beautiful things. Zap immediately flashed with excitement, and Rakrak stopped walking and watched it. Then Zap inquired about his name, which Rakrak promptly responded, and with that, Zap addressed him by his name, and declared that the test is over. It will accept all the conditions he have offered, which made Rakrak delighted. At the same time, at Nebula's side of things, a system interface popped up, notifying him of a demonic magic spirit wishes to be subjugated to him. If he accept, he will receive demonic magic area, electricity, which Nebula immediately clicked yes. And now it was done. Nebula felt a sense of satisfaction. This outcome was the best possible scenario he had hoped for. The key to circumventing the penalties associated with demonic magic lay in transferring it to the divinity area. Without this transfer, each individual imbued with demonic magic would be labeled as demonic magic enchanted and become uncontrollable. However, once demonic magic was housed within the divinity area, it could be managed and controlled effectively. This strategic move ensured a balance and maintainable use of this potent power. And just as Zap accepted Rakrak's conditions, it became feasible to bestow demonic magic upon select individuals. However, transferring this power to the divinity area did not transform it into divinity, nor could it be leveled up like other abilities in the divinity area. There were specific limitations to its use. Nonetheless, the absence of penalties was a victory in itself, and if breaking through the ancient ruin was all that was needed to be done to obtain demonic power, that would be more than worth it. Rakrak's group would win even if hundreds of those monster rats came attacking them. And if needed, Nebula could always support them by using faith points. However, subjugating a spirit of demonic magic was much more difficult to do. Nebula didn't even know if it would be possible. The only way to find out was to wait and see what would happen depending on each character's abilities. And Nebula seemed to have gotten lucky again and succeeded in doing so. However, Nebula didn't think this was mere coincidence. Meeting Rakrak seems to have been good luck for the both of them, suggesting a significant and potentially beneficial connection between them. After that, several days had passed. There were two figures standing at the top of a hill. Among the pair was a lizard man, proudly telling the story about how the blue insect god gave Rakrak the power of thunder and lightning. And this is the end of the story of how the Chosen Ones came to be among their black-scaled lizardman tribe. And that was 9 years ago. The lizardmen told this as they were in front of a tower made from tombstones and water buffalo bones, stacked and assembled with plaster to build a structure tall enough to be seen from far away in the wilderness. This bone tower was built on top of the old one that Rakrak had first created, and was not only used as a way to show faith in the blue insect god, but also used as a milestone now. Finishing telling the long story, the black-scaled lizardman gently dusted one of the stone monuments. This lizardman wore expensive layers of a fabric called silk, which indicated he belonged to a high social class. But the man, on the other hand, looked shabby. On his head was a questionable piece of leather that didn't seem properly tanned, and he had a bushy beard. Still, the man was quite friendly with the lizardman, and thinks what he just told was an interesting story. But there was one thing that he can't wrap around his mind, so he pointed out that the god the lizard believes in is an insect god. So he doesn't get what does that have to do with thunder and lightning. And the lizardman just tilted his head. He didn't seem thrown off by the question, though. It was more of a tilt that questioned why this man would be asking about such a thing. Still, he answered the man by a question, asking it what color is the lightning, which the man answered blue. The lizard man then pointed out that their deity is referred to as the blue insect god. That's why. But the human did not understand what the lizardman meant by that. So he just begun to think that lizardmen are always convinced and swayed by the strangest things. They're so odd. This man didn't think being odd was necessarily a bad thing, though. But he was convinced that he might be able to take advantage of the fact that they're odd. Hiding his innermost thoughts, the man introduced himself as Hui, and then asked the lizardman what his name was, which the lizardman was about to answer. But he noticed something from the distance, so he promptly apologized for cutting their conversations short, as he think there's some uninvited guests coming over. At far below, there was a group of armed gnolls walking through the valley. This hyena-like species had protruding snouts and black spots on their brown bodies. They had rough tempers and were obsessive over power structures, so they fought frequently amongst themselves. But the overall opinion of the players of the Lost World was that they were still worthy of consideration despite all these shortcomings. Their physical ability and intelligence were both high on average, so they were known to be a good species to have at the start of the game, regardless of what the player's small area was. But these facts about the game had no bearing on the lizard man, and the man named Hui. The lizard man then asked Hui he thinks they are Salkite's men. Salkite was the tribal chief of the Gnoll tribe, also known as the Earcut tribe, which were hostile towards the black-scaled lizardmen. The black-scaled lizardmen from the south and the Earscut tribe from the northeast were the two largest tribes of the wilderness, So all the other smaller tribes had great interest in the two. Salkate and Rakrak believed in different gods. Therefore, it was inevitable for both tribal chiefs to be hostile towards each other. The man named Hui took great interest in whether the two tribes were going to fight, and if they did, who would win, excluding the human tribe, of course. At least within this specific wilderness, would be comparable to these two powerful tribes. But he decided to reply with a bit of sincerity. So the man took a closer look at the Knoll group coming up the hill and came to a conclusion. He doesn't think they're Salkate's men, since it's strange that they would come to this area. If they were Salkate's men and part of the Ears Cut tribe, Rakrak would definitely know of them coming this way, and they wouldn't be wandering around here so fearlessly. And he thinks that these group of Knolls is just used to be part of Salkate's tribe, but were driven out because of infighting. That kind of situation is common for Knolls. They might look armed, but if they look closely, it's clearly a sham. That one doesn't even have a knife. He's just holding a wooden club, which the lizard man accepted Hui's explanation to be reasonable. But he thinks it's because they aren't cautious of their surroundings at all. If they were Salkate's scouting party, they would search the mountain ridge first, and wouldn't take that smooth path. They look tired and exhausted, so they are vagrants. And if they were a scouting party of the Ears Cut tribe, they would actually be friendly. They would know that getting into such a trivial battle is meaningless, and both scouting parties would rather have a meal together and try to get information from each other. In this context, the lizardman reached for an arrow. In doing so, he unveiled his true identity. It turned out he was Owen all along, and he was about to deliver the most electrifying greeting that the Knolls would die for.